As French warplanes are bombarding Mali, there are those who are asking why French and not African Union forces are trying to stop fighters from taking over the country. What are France's plans in Mali? Why is Paris fighting the rebels in Mali but is supporting the same groups fighting the government in Syria? On this edition of News Analysis, we ask what lies ahead for the resource-rich African state of Mali.
Days after the beginning of France's military action in Mali, reports indicate that the mission is not going as French leaders had planned.
We are dealing with heavily armed groups in the west where operations are taking place at the moment next to the Malian forces.
The comments come as fighters threaten to take the war to the heart of Paris in reaction to the French intervention. Malian officials are also reporting that the attacks failed to stop the fighters from heading towards the capital. Rather, they have also managed to capture the city of Daibali and a series of nearby towns, which puts them on the road leading directly to Bamako. On top of that, there are now fears of a humanitarian crisis as French fighter jets pound the towns and cities that eyewitnesses say are not under the control of the fighters.
Well, the situation is of concern to the ICRC. Is fast deteriorating. Mass displacement of population is already being observed. Casualties.
As messages of support for Paris begin pouring in by its NATO allies, it seems that France has had no difficulty selling its claims that the military intervention in Mali is necessary to stop the fighters' advance.
As regards recent developments in Mali, I reiterated the EU's deep concern with the actions of terrorists and rebel groups in that country, which pose a serious threat to its governability and are causing so much suffering among the population.
France has taken swift action to roll back the offensive by the terrorist groups in Mali, and we're hopeful that such efforts will help restore the rule of law in Mali and also reduce the threats posed by terrorist organizations.
European, American and French leaders claim the fighters with links to radical groups are putting the security of regional and European countries at risk. This is while they have been supporting the same groups in another country for nearly 2 years, Syria. These countries have persistently turned a deaf ear to repeated calls for a political solution to the unrest in Syria. Mali is the newest example of the West's double standards on issues like terrorism, security, militancy, Al-queda-related groups, and the rule of law. France has a history of intervention and armed action in Africa, where it used to be a colonial power for decades. Its intervention in Mali is reminiscent of the bitter memories of that colonial past, but there are high stakes that a long presence in Mali might drag Paris into a long Afghanistan-style war.
Joining me now live from London is Mr. Omowale Rupert. He is with the Pan-African Movement. I'd also like to welcome our guest with us on the line, also from East Africa, Mr. Finian Cunningham, with the Global Research, Middle East and East Africa correspondent. Thank you very much for being with us, gentlemen. My first question to our guest in London, Mr. Rupert. The French Foreign Minister has said that the military involvement would be for a, quote, matter of weeks and that it would not turn out to be another Afghanistan, again in his words. Others are saying that the extensive mobilization of troops and warplanes and the mere geopolitical backdrop to this development suggests otherwise. What do you think?
This is certainly not a short-term mission on the part of France, but I would take actually a step back from looking immediately at France, because what is going on here is what I would describe as a trio of evil, where three imperialist powers are jointly invading a part of Africa, the Mali part of Africa. The leading imperialist nation is US Satan in that trio. France is also a part of that trio of evil, and the United Kingdom, the British government, is also a part of that trio of evil. Now, they already understand that they are going to meet formidable opposition on the ground. And this is the reason why that they have, they've launched, this is the reason why they've brought so much equipment into the area with the threat of bringing even more equipment into the area. So we know, for instance, that Britain has made some of its transporter planes available to the French government to ship masses of military equipment into Mali on the ground, where they can heap devastation on the lives of the people.
So, Mr. Rupert, you're basically telling us that, in your words, if I just may jump in here, that there is an invasion or an attempt to invade, you say, Mali as part of Africa. Just like to bring in our guest with us on the line from East Africa, Mr. Cunningham, do you think that Britain and the US, they've already started to assist France, of course, that they haven't sent troops on the ground, and Germany is also promising logistical support. Do you think this is the beginning of a full-fledged NATO operation in Mali?
Yes, I do, and I agree with your first guest. I think this is opening up a protracted new intervention, a war, in fact, in Mali, headed up by France, but backed up by the United States, Britain, Canada, Germany, Denmark. I mean, various powers that are NATO members. So this is a new war, a new front of this global war that the NATO powers are waging across the globe. You know, we've got it in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, covertly in Syria, and now Mali is a new opening of this kind of permanent war on the planet by these NATO capitalist imperialist powers. I mean, it's really just laughable that France is making out that it's a backup kind of support role for African-led mission. The ECOWAS, the West African Economic Community, the 15-nation bloc, is supposed to be, the African face for this intervention against a terrorist threat. Well, I mean, that whole charade has now been dispelled. The mask is off, and we now see just a naked neo-imperialist agenda that the Western powers have been hovering over Mali for the last few months.
Well, you referred there to the issue of ECOWAS here. Let's just go back to our guest in London, Mr. Rupert. Officially, we know Paris, London and Washington have been pushing for an African-led military intervention. Do you think there is the will from the side of African nations to intervene here?
Now, what we've had is a very significant change which has taken course over the past 2 or so years. US Satan has got an overarching program which it calls AFRICOM, which is the blueprint for its invasion of Africa and its military recolonization of Africa. Now, the neocolonial leadership in Africa has been resistant to AFRICOM up until now. They have not been able, that's US Satan, have not been able to find a base in Africa to launch their AFRICOM program proper in the continent. Now what has happened is, with that trio of evil and their assault on Libya, they've created a degree of chaos in the northern part especially of the continent of Africa. They've created the conditions where now they can bring soldiers on the ground with the African neocolonial leadership now quivering in their boots, trembling, wondering if they're going to be the next to be deposed in the way that Colonel Gaddafi's government was ousted in Libya. So we have a situation where this massive war machine is being set in trail. US Satan has announced, for instance, that it's going to have troops on the ground in 35 different micronations in Africa. This is a genocidal assault against the people of Africa, and we haven't even had a chance to discuss the people of Africa yet.
Well, I'm just being told that joining us now, also live from Detroit, is Mr. Abayomi Azikiwe. He's editor of Pan-African Newswire. I'd like to welcome him. Mr. Azikiwe, let's put this question to you as well. Last month, the United Nations Security Council gave a final approval for the West African military mission, and following the Security Council vote, diplomats at the UN and in West African capitals, they were talking about the combined African mission of some 3,500 troops being deployed much later this year, in September, in fact, at the earliest. But what was the reason for this, what could be called abrupt sidestepping of African forces and France stepping in?
First of all, we have to understand that the economic community of West African states apparently was in no position to intervene to resolve the internal conflict that's going on now in northern and central Mali. We have to understand that France already has military forces in Mali, as well as many other countries on the African continent. They were heavily involved in the bombing of Libya during 2011. They, in conjunction with the United States, have been involved in training, coordinating, and financing Malian military forces for some time. The captain, which overthrew the government of President Touré back in March, had been trained in a U.S. military academy over an extended period of time. At the same time, despite all of this training, despite all of this coordination, they were not able to handle an internal rebellion in the north of the country. The Tuareg people in Mali have been involved in various rebellions ever since the beginning of the independence struggle in Mali, going all the way back to the early 1960s. All of these previous conflicts and rebellions have been resolved internally within Mali. However, with this extensive training by the U.S. Africa Command, they have not been able to resolve the internal conflict. And of course, this provides a pretext for the French, as well as the United States and Britain and Denmark as well, to come in and engage in this massive bombing operation against the people of Mali. It's going to be a disastrous effort. And I think that many people are going to be killed in this whole process.
Now, let's just pick up on what you just said there. Mr. Cunningham, if I could bring you here on this. The Malian military is accused of letting many towns fall, with barely a shot fired since the insurgency began almost a year ago in this northwest African nation. What do you think, first of all, is the purpose of the insurgency in the first place? And why has the military failed to contain it, allowing for this French forces rather and Western forces to come and militarily intervene?
Well, as our guest in Detroit alluded to, the insurgency in Mali, in northern Mali, has been going on for decades. The modern borders of Mali are a colonial construct imposed on people that have traditions and cultures going back thousands of years, the Tuareg rebels being one. These nomadic people are living under a rigid neo-colonial kind of border imposed on them. So it's quite natural that they have been resisting this imposition, this false construct that's been placed on them. And they have a legitimate cause of separatist cause. Now, the French and the Western powers are really twisting the narrative into a kind of a war on terror narrative, which gives them a pretext to intervene in that very resource-rich part of Africa, and not only Mali, but the whole western region of Africa is a tremendous untapped resource for oil, agriculture, and various minerals, metals. So that the Western powers are really looking for a pretext to get in there to assert their authority on Mali and the neighbouring countries. And in order to do that, they are traducing the separatist struggle of the Tuareg rebels, against this.
Mr. Cunningham, I'll stop you there if I may. You're saying that, the issue of the war on terror here. Just like to bring in Mr. Rupert on this. The British Prime Minister, Mr. Rupert David Cameron, and the French President, François Hollande, they've agreed that the situation in Mali poses a real threat to international security. And some are saying that the precise nature of this so-called threat from Mali should be spelled out, should be evidenced. They're saying we expected to accept, for instance, the word of Paris, London and Washington about this threat, the same states, they say, that have and are still conducting wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya or Syria.
Yes, and again, the logic of imperialism is very simple. First, imperialism invades other people's homelands. Its reason for invading is to steal the resources that are in other people's homelands. Then when people resist, because naturally, if anybody tries to steal something from me, I will resist. So when the people resist, then it unleashes genocidal scale murder against those people in order to keep them down-pressed and oppressed. And then it lies like hell in order to cover the evil that it's involved in. And so that pattern is actually in existence right now in Mali. The people of Mali are being forced to suffer under bombings when they have done nothing to merit this. One of the other guests has spoken about the way that this has been contained within the borders of Mali, or within the geopolitical entity of Mali for a long time. Captain Amadou Sanogo, whom he alluded to, was actually trained in more than one US Satan base. He was actually trained in military academies in Georgia, in Texas, and in some other, Virginia was the other place where he was actually trained. So part of what is going on at the moment is an attempt to prop up a government which itself came into existence as a result of a coup, but that coup, the imperialism saw no need to intervene in relation to that coup. Suddenly, at the threat that this government may be overturned, a government whose leader is trained by US Satan in its own military academies, suddenly there's this need to bring in all kinds of military equipment in order to defend this government, which itself is of questionable legitimacy.
Now, I'd just like to bring in a quote here. Mr. Azikiwe, Omar Ould Hamah, he's a fighter leader. He said that, quote, France has opened the gates of hell. It's fallen into a trap much more dangerous than Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia. Other reports telling us right now that the fighters are now only, according to the latest reports, 400 kilometers from Mali's capital, closer than they were before the French military intervention. So do you think this is going to be a setback in terms of the French fighting? And where do you think basically the situation is headed between the rebels and the French troops?
It's a no-win situation for France and the other NATO countries involved in this operation. They do not have a clue in regard to the concrete conditions that exist on the ground inside of northern and central Mali. They have already suffered casualties on the ground. And of course, the launching of such an operation, claiming that it is aimed specifically against so-called Islamist terrorists, is absurd. There's no names on the bombs that are being dropped on the villages, on the towns, and on the cities inside of Mali. In fact, in Kono yesterday, there were numerous people killed, innocent civilians who were killed when the bombs began to drop. Even a number of children who jumped into a waterway in order to avoid the impact of these ordinances that are being dropped on this small town. 3 of them died. They drowned as a result of the French military operation. This is something that cannot be contained to one region of Mali or even one section of West or perhaps even North Africa. It is a situation that will warrant further military intervention by France as well as the United States. They have already sent in additional ground troops, some 400 that are stationed now in Bamako, the capital in the south. It's a recipe for unmitigated disaster. And I think that the international community should demand that France immediately halt the bombing that is taking place now in Mali and resume negotiations to try to resolve this internal conflict that's going on right now inside Mali.
Yeah, let's go to our guest now, Mr. Cunningham. The question of how Western powers, how the international community, when it comes, of course, to the United Nations, acts on various crises that happen around the world. We see, for instance, in Syria, what we raised at the start of this program, the troops, rather the amount of military assistance that's being given to the insurgents in Syria that include Al-queda. And now in the case of Mali, we have these troops being sent by France and helped by other countries to fight the troops that include, again, Al-queda. How this terror threat is being described on various occasions does seem hypocritical, doesn't it?
Yes, well, you point out a very important contradiction. I mean, the Western powers are hand in glove with these so-called jihadi groups in Syria to subvert that country. yet they're being flagged up in Mali as a cause for concern and a cause for immediate intervention. So, yes, you point, the contradictions you point out, points up that the Western powers are just making up rules as they go along to suit their geopolitical interests. If they want to intervene in the country, they flag up some sort of spectre of extremism, or else they use them to their effect, strategic effect in places like Syria. I should point out that there have been negotiations over the last few months in Mali, well, actually in the neighbouring country Burkina Faso. Some of the separatist groups, Ansar Dine, have been in negotiations, peace negotiations with the government in Bamako, the Malian government. So the French and the Western allies are really just subverting a process. They're just totally sidestepping a process, a natural process that's ongoing to try and negotiate a solution. So again, this points up the calumny that the French and the Western powers are claiming that they're supporting the African the countries in the locality. But yet, they're really taking the initiative. They're really resting the initiative of these countries. They're completely ignoring the political negotiations that are ongoing with the separatist groups in the Malian government, and they're just weighing in with military boots on the ground and airstrikes, which is our guest in Detroit.
I'll just stop you there, Mr. Cunningham, if I may. We're running out of time. I'd just like to give a concluding remarks to our other guests as well. In London, Mr. Rupert, quickly if you can, do you think that it would have been better for African forces to have intervened in Mali, that it needed that intervention, or do you think that a negotiated process would have worked?
In the Pan-African Society Community Forum, of which I'm a member, we do not want the blood of African people to be spilt. We, as Africans, would want unity amongst Africans, and we want negotiated settlements. So we are opposed to this whole idea of seeking a military solution. There can be no military solution to the situation in Mali. The imperialists will be militarily defeated on the ground. They will be sent home in boxes in red, white, with red, white and blue flags wrapped around them.
Right,
we did it in
Angola, there,
Mr. Rupert. We did it in Zimbabwe, we did it in Guinea-Bissau, we did it all over the African continent. They cannot win
okay, I'll stop you there if I may, Mr. Rupert. Just under a minute left for Mr. Azikiwe on this as well. Do you think, Mr. Azikiwe, that if there wasn't a military solution, that those rebels would have reached the capital, that a negotiated solution is enough, basically?
I believe that the situation should be resolved internally. I do not believe that even should be a regional force entering Mali if it is not independent of France and the United States. If they're working at the behest of the imperialist powers, there will be no solution in Mali or any other region in Africa. We saw what happened in Somalia on the same day, where they actually went in and tried to rescue a French intelligence officer. It was just as disastrous as the current situation that is prevailing now in Mali. Africa has to move independently, and that is the only way peace and security is going to be brought about on the continent.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abayomi Azikiwe, editor of Pan-African Newswire, with us there from Detroit. A big thank you to our guest in London with the Pan-African Movement, Mr. Omowale Rupert, and also with us the Global Research Middle East and East Africa correspondent, Mr. Finian Cunningham, with us on the line from East Africa. Thank you very much for staying with another edition of News Analysis. From me, Homa Lesgi. It's goodbye.